What would you do if you discovered that your family's official history was merely a facade, concealing secrets so terrible they could destroy an entire generation? Imagine the cold breath of the wind piercing the bare branches of trees on a remote pass in the northern Urals, a place where time seems to have stopped, where the mountains hold secrets that should never have been revealed. The sounds here are muffled by the snow. Each step leaves a deep footprint, a reminder that nature remembers everyone who dares to disturb its peace. And it is here, on the infamous Dyatlov Pass, that our story began, long before the tragedy that made this place famous. A story so distorted by time and human efforts that even the most courageous researchers refused to dig deeper. If you are fascinated by historical mysteries and unexplained events, subscribe to our channel, where we uncover forgotten pages of the past that official sources prefer to ignore. On a frosty February day in 2023, Anatoly Sokolov, a historian from Ekaterinburg State University, was conducting standard research in the local archives for his new book on the history of the Urals. He didn't expect to find anything special, simply sorting through dusty folders of documents to fill in gaps in his work. The archive room was dimly lit, the air dry and stale, as if the documents themselves were sucking moisture from the atmosphere. Anatoly was used to this sensation, a slight tingling in his fingertips from the old paper, a barely perceptible smell of time that seemed to whisper stories of bygone eras. But that day, he stumbled upon a strange anomaly. In the corner of the archive room stood a small metal cabinet that, judging by the layer of dust, had not been opened for decades. The key was hanging on a nail nearby, which seemed unusual to Anatoly. Usually, such cabinets were securely locked, and the keys were kept by the archivist. Driven by professional curiosity, he opened the cabinet and found a single folder with pages yellowed with age. On the first page was written simply, Dyatlov Pass, 1934, case number 17. Sokolov froze. 1934. That was 25 years before the well-known Dyatlov group tragedy in 1959. He had never heard of any significant events on the pass in the 1930s. The folder contained a strange mixture of official documents and personal records. Some pages were torn, others partially burned, as if someone had tried to destroy their contents but then changed their mind. The first document was a report from an NKVD officer dated March 1934. It spoke of an investigation into anomalous events in a settlement not far from the place that would later become known as Dyatlov Pass. The settlement was called Vishera, and according to the census of that time, it had just over 40 residents. The report was written by a certain Captain Igor Melnikov, who wrote in a dry, official language, but even through this bureaucratic veil, a clear concern was evident. Melnikov described how local residents had appealed to the authorities with complaints of inexplicable phenomena and a disruption of the natural order in the Varnin family, who lived in seclusion on the outskirts of the settlement. Particular attention in the report was paid to a young woman named Ekaterina Voronina, who, according to local residents, carried an ancient evil within her. Sokolov continued reading, and a chill ran down his spine. It seemed that the room itself had become cooler, although the day was quite warm. In the folder, he found several black and white photographs. One of them showed a young woman with a pale face and deep, dark eyes that seemed to look straight into the soul. This must have been Ekaterina. Next to her stood an elderly man with a stern expression, dressed in the traditional clothing of a Ural peasant. The caption on the back of the photograph read, Ekaterina and Mikhail Varnin, 1933. But what really intrigued Anatoly was the entry in Captain Melnikov's diary, which differed significantly from his official report. In the diary, he wrote, "What I have found in the Varnin's house contradicts all the laws of nature. I must document it, although I doubt that anyone will believe it. Ekaterina, who is presented to everyone as the daughter of Mikhail Varnin, is also his mother. I have seen documents confirming this impossible fact. And, what is even more disturbing, she is also her own granddaughter. I cannot explain how this is possible, but the evidence is irrefutable." Sokolov put down the diary. His hands were trembling slightly. He thought that perhaps the NKVD captain had gone mad or had fallen victim to local superstitions, or, more likely, it was some kind of complex family confusion misinterpreted in the documents. However, as he continued to study the contents of the folder, the puzzle became more and more confusing and disturbing. One of the documents was a medical report signed by Dr. Alexei Petrov, a local physician who had been called to Vishera to examine Ekaterina Voronina. Dr. Petrov wrote, "The physiological subject presents as a normal woman of approximately 25 years of age. However, there are a number of anomalies that I cannot explain from a scientific point of view. First, her body shows signs of both youth and significant age simultaneously. Second, samples of her blood contain elements that I cannot identify with the means available to me. Third, and this is most disturbing, the results of all tests indicate that she is biologically related to Mikhail Varnin in two ways, as his daughter and as his mother. I know this is impossible, and I can only assume that there has been some error in my methods or equipment." Attached to the conclusion were several diagrams and charts that were apparently intended to illustrate genetic connections, but Sokolov could not fully decipher them without special knowledge in the field of medicine. However, even for a non-specialist, it was obvious that Dr. Petrov was deeply puzzled by his discoveries. The next document was a transcript of an interrogation of Mikhail Varnin conducted by Captain Melnikov. Varnin, who was 62 years old at the time, gave confused and contradictory testimony. He claimed that Ekaterina was his daughter, born in 1909 to his late wife. But when Melnikov showed him documents indicating that Ekaterina was also registered as his mother, born in 1873, the old man broke down. According to the transcript of the interrogation, Mikhail Varnin said, "It's a curse on our family. It started with my mother, Ekaterina. She was always different. Everyone in the village knew it, but no one spoke aloud. She didn't age like ordinary people. When I turned 20, she still looked like a young girl. And then she gave birth to a daughter, whom she also named Ekaterina. And this girl, she was an exact copy of my mother, not just similar but exactly the same. And when my mother disappeared in the blizzard of 1908, her daughter began to change. By the time she was 16, she had become my mother. The same eyes, the same voice, the same knowledge. She knew things that only my mother knew. She remembered events that happened before her birth." At this place in the transcript was a note in Melnikov's handwriting. "The subject is likely suffering from a serious mental disorder. A medical examination is recommended." However, the following pages of the transcript showed that Melnikov was in no hurry to dismiss Varnin's testimony as the ravings of a madman. Instead, he began a more thorough investigation, which included interviewing all the residents of Vishera and studying local legends and traditions. Anatoly Sokolov was so engrossed in reading that he did not notice how dark it had become in the archive room. Only when the archivist knocked on the door, informing him that it would soon be closing, did he realize how much time had passed. Sokolov asked permission to take the folder home for further study, but the archivist flatly refused, citing the rules. Instead, Anatoly took as many photographs of the documents as possible with his phone before reluctantly returning the folder to the metal cabinet. That night, Sokolov could not sleep. He looked through the photographs of the documents again and again, trying to find a logical explanation for the whole story. Perhaps it was just a strange family confusion, exacerbated by limited access to medical knowledge in a remote village. Or perhaps Captain Melnikov and Dr. Petrov had fallen victim to a collective delusion widespread among superstitious locals. But something was bothering him, something in Ekaterina's eyes in that photograph. There was a depth and knowledge in them that seemed inappropriate for a young woman from a remote Ural village in the 1930s. The next morning, Sokolov returned to the archive, but he was in for an unpleasant surprise. The metal cabinet was open, and the folder with case number 18 had disappeared. When he asked the archivist, he looked at him in bewilderment and stated that he had never seen such a folder and that this particular cabinet had always been empty, as it was used for storing cleaning supplies. Sokolov realized that something strange was happening, but he still had photographs of the documents on his phone. He decided to continue the investigation on his own. His first step was to check whether the settlement of Vishera even existed. To his surprise, he discovered that such a place did indeed exist, but it had been abandoned in the mid-1930s. According to official data, The settlement had been evacuated due to unfavorable environmental conditions, which was a vague enough formulation to arouse suspicion. Then Sokolov decided to check whether the people mentioned in the documents had existed. He started with Captain Igor Melnikov. In the NKVD archives, there was indeed an officer with that name who had served in the Ural region in the 1930s. However, his personal file ended with a strange note. Removed from service due to mental health in April 1934, after a failed investigation in the settlement of Vishera, died under unclear circumstances in October of the same year. Dr. Alexei Petrov turned out to be an even more interesting figure. He was a well-known physician in his circles, specializing in genetic anomalies, which was quite progressive for the time. After his work in Vishera, he published several articles on hereditary anomalies in isolated communities, but soon after that, his scientific activity abruptly ceased. The last mention of him dated back to 1936, when he was placed in a psychiatric hospital with a diagnosis of paranoid delirium. As for the Varnin family, information was much more difficult to find. Official population censuses mentioned several Varnins in Vishera, but the details were meager. However, Sokolov came across an interesting note in a local newspaper from 1934, which spoke of a tragic fire in Vishera that destroyed the Varnin family's house and claimed the lives of all its members. But what really struck Anatoly was the name of the journalist who wrote this note, Ekaterina Sokolova. This was a strange coincidence, given his own last name. Driven by growing unease, he decided to check his own family history more carefully. Sokolov had never been particularly interested in his genealogy. He knew that his grandfather, Nikolai Sokolov, had been a journalist in Sverdlovsk, now Ekaterinburg, in the 1930s and 1940s, but he knew little about his wife, his grandmother. Now he began to rummage through family albums and documents that were stored in an old suitcase in the attic of his house. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Among the yellowed photographs, there was one that stood out. It showed a young woman standing next to his grandfather, and although the quality of the photograph was not ideal, Anatoly could have sworn that it was the same woman as in the photograph from the archive Ekaterina Voronina. The caption on the back read, Nikolai and Ekaterina Sokolov, 1939. Anatoly felt a chill run down his spine. If the documents from the archive were to be believed, Ekaterina Voronina should have died in the fire in 1934. How could she have married his grandfather 5 years later? And why did she look so strikingly similar to the woman in the photograph from case number 17? Driven by growing unease, Sokolov continued his investigation. He contacted several distant relatives, trying to learn more about his grandmother. Most of them knew little, but his elderly aunt, Maria, seemed concerned about his questions. "Why are you digging into the past, Anatoly?" she asked over the phone. Her voice trembled with excitement. Some doors are better left closed. When he pressed her, she reluctantly agreed to meet with him. Maria lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Ekaterinburg. When Sokolov arrived, she seemed nervous and kept glancing out the window, as if she expected to see someone unwanted there. "I don't know much about Ekaterina," she said, pouring tea into old porcelain cups that trembled in her hands. "She was always strange. She appeared in your grandfather's life suddenly. No one knew where she came from. She had no family, no past that she would talk about. But she was beautiful, smart, and your grandfather was fascinated by her." Maria paused, as if gathering her thoughts. But there were other things that no one could explain. She knew things she shouldn't have known. She predicted events before they happened. And she never changed, Anatoly. In all the years that I knew her, she looked exactly the same. Even when your grandfather began to go gray and age, she remained young and beautiful. "And what happened to her?" Sokolov asked, feeling his heart beat faster. Maria was silent for a long time before answering. "Officially, she died in childbirth in 1953, when your mother was born. But I never saw her body, no one did. And there were rumors." "What rumors?" "Rumors that she didn't die, that she just left, and that she predicted that she would return, that she always returns." Maria stood up and went to an old chest of drawers. From the bottom drawer, she took out a small wooden box. "This belonged to her. Your grandfather gave it to me for safekeeping before he died." He said it should remain sealed, but perhaps now is the time to open it. The box was made of dark wood with intricate carvings on the lid depicting a strange symbol resembling a spiral. It was locked, but next to it lay a small bronze key. Sokolov took the box with trembling hands. It was unexpectedly heavy for its size, and when he shook it, something thudded dully inside. "You must be careful, Anatoly," Maria warned. "Some secrets are better left buried." But Sokolov could not stop. He was too deeply involved in this mystery. That night, back home, he put the box on the table and stared at it for a long time, gathering his courage to open it. Finally, he inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The lock clicked, and the lid lifted with a quiet creak. Inside the box lay an old diary in a leather binding yellowed with age. On the first page was written in neat handwriting, "Ekaterina Voronina, 1873, 1934, 1953. Sokolov opened the diary and began to read. The diary was written in a strange mixture of Russian and some other language that Sokolov could not identify. But even those parts that were in Russian were difficult to understand, full of archaic expressions and references to events and places he had never heard of. However, some passages were clear enough, and they told a story that shocked Sokolov to the core. According to the diary, Ekaterina Voronina was born in 1873 in a small village in the Urals, but she was not an ordinary child. From an early age, she possessed strange abilities. She could foresee the future, read the thoughts of other people, and, most strangely, she could move her soul into the bodies of her descendants. In the diary, she described this as gifts, a curse passed down to me by my mother, and to her by her mother, and so on, going back into the depths of time. Ekaterina wrote that when she reached a certain age, the number was written in an unknown language. She discovered that her consciousness began to drift between her own body and the body of her future daughter, who had not even been conceived yet. This led to a strange situation where she actually chose her future husband, Mikhail Varnin, knowing that he would become the father of her daughter. In 1908, she gave birth to a girl, whom she also named Ekaterina, and as the child grew, the connection between them became stronger and stronger. By the time the girl was 16, the elder Ekaterina's consciousness had completely transferred into her daughter's body, while her own body disappeared during a severe blizzard. But the process did not end there. In her new body, with all the memories and knowledge of her previous life, Ekaterina continued the cycle. She became pregnant by a local man, gave birth to another daughter, and the process repeated itself. According to the diary, this had happened several times over the centuries. Ekaterina was trapped in an endless cycle of reincarnation, each time becoming her own daughter, and then granddaughter, and so on. There were hints in the diary that this cycle had begun in very ancient times, perhaps even before the arrival of the Slavs in the Urals. Ekaterina mentioned ancient gods who gave this gift to her ancestors and the price that each generation had to pay. But what really alarmed Sokolov were the last entries in the diary, dated 1953. In them, Ekaterina wrote about her daughter, whom she named Anna, and how she was preparing for another transition. But something went wrong. She wrote about a dark force that was trying to interrupt the cycle and that she would have to hide for a while. The last entry read, "I will return. I always return. My daughter does not know her heritage, but blood remembers. When the time comes, I will find her and her daughter. The cycle must continue. It is the only way." Sokolov closed the diary. His hands were trembling. Anna was his mother's name. If this diary was to be believed, his mother was the daughter of Ekaterina, a woman who somehow, incomprehensibly, was both her mother and her daughter at the same time. And that meant he didn't finish the thought when his phone rang. It was his mother. She rarely called so late, and there was worry in her voice. "Anatoly, your Aunt Maria just called me. She said you were asking about my mother." Sokolov felt a chill run down his spine. "Yes, it's for my historical research. I just wanted to know more about our family history." There was a long pause. "Anatoly, you must stop this investigation immediately. Some doors are better left unopened." These were almost the same words that Maria had used. "Mom, what's going on? What do you know about Ekaterina?" Another pause. Come to me tomorrow. Don't tell anyone where you're going, and don't bring the diary with you." "What diary?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "Don't pretend, Anatoly. I know that Maria gave you the box. Just don't bring it with you." The connection broke, and Sokolov was left alone with his questions and a growing sense of fear. The next day, he drove to his mother, who lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city. The day was overcast. Heavy clouds hung over the horizon, promising snow. When Sokolov arrived, he noticed that the curtains on the windows were drawn, and the front door was locked with several locks. His mother, Anna Sokolova, looked older than her 68 years. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. They sat in silence for several minutes before she finally spoke. "I hoped this day would never come," she said in a quiet voice, almost a whisper. "I hoped I could take this secret with me to the grave." Sokolov leaned forward. "What secret, Mom? What's going on?" Anna took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength for a long story. "The woman you think is your grandmother, Ekaterina, she wasn't who she seemed to be. She was something else, something ancient and powerful." She stood up and went to an old secretary in the corner of the room. From a hidden drawer, she took out an old photograph and handed it to Anatoly. The photograph showed a young woman with a baby in her arms. The woman looked exactly like Ekaterina in the photographs he had seen before. "This is her with me shortly after I was born in 1953, Anna said. "Officially, she is considered to have died in childbirth, but that's a lie. She disappeared a week after I was born, just left me with my father and disappeared. But before she left a letter that I was supposed to read when I turned 16. Anna went to the secretary again and took out a yellowed envelope. "Here it is. I read it many years ago and have lived in fear ever since, in fear that she would return, as she promised." Sokolov took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in the same neat handwriting as the diary. "My dear daughter," it read, "by the time you read this, I will be long gone. But don't think that I have abandoned you. I am always near, always watching. I am forced to hide now because people who are afraid of what they cannot understand are looking for me. They consider our gift a curse, something that must be destroyed, but they do not understand its meaning. You are the continuation of an ancient line going back to the depths of time. Our family was chosen for an important mission, a mission that has been going on for thousands of years. We are the guardians, my daughter. We are keepers of something ancient and powerful, something that cannot be allowed to disappear. Someday, if you give birth to a daughter, I will return. I will return through her, as I always have. The cycle must continue. It is not just our duty, it is a necessity, because if the cycle is interrupted, if the chain is broken, the consequences will be catastrophic, not only for our family, but for the whole world. Take care of yourself, my dear, and remember, blood remembers, even if the mind forgets." The letter was signed, simply, "Your mother, who is also your daughter and granddaughter, Ekaterina." Sokolov put the letter on the table. His thoughts were in complete disarray. "This is some kind of madness," he whispered. Anna nodded. "I thought so too. I was sure that my mother was just crazy, suffering from some kind of strange delusion. But then things started happening that I couldn't explain." "What things?" Anatoly asked. "Dreams," Anna replied. "Dreams about places I've never been, about people I've never met. But in these dreams, I wasn't myself. I was Ekaterina, and in these dreams, I saw things, terrible things, things that would happen if the cycle was interrupted." She paused, looking out the window at the gathering clouds. "That's why I never wanted to have a daughter, Anatoly. That's why I was so happy when you, my son, were born. I thought that this would end the cycle, that this would free us from this curse." Sokolov felt a chill run down his spine. "But I have a daughter, Mom. I have an Ekaterina." Anna's face paled even further. "What did you say?" "I have a daughter, Katya. She's 16 now. I never told you about her because, well, you know how things turned out with her mother. It was painful. I didn't want to stir up old wounds. Katya lives with her mother in Moscow. We're not very close, but I send money for her support." Anna clutched her heart. Her eyes widened in horror. "Oh God, Anatoly, what have you done? You named her Ekaterina. You gave her that name." "Yes, in honor of my grandmother. I thought it would be a good way to honor a family tradition." "Mom, what's happening?" But Anna was no longer listening. She rushed to the phone and began frantically dialing a number. "Maria, it's Anna. This happened. The cycle continues. Anatoly has a daughter, and he named her Ekaterina." Sokolov could hear Maria's anxious voice on the other end of the line, but could not make out the words. Anna listened, nodding, her face becoming more and more alarmed. "Yes, she's 16. No, he didn't know. I didn't know myself until today. We need to act quickly. You know what to do." She hung up and turned to Anatoly. "We have to find your daughter immediately, before it happens, before what happens?" he asked, feeling a growing panic. "Before she becomes Ekaterina, before the cycle is complete." That same evening, Sokolov and Anna flew to Moscow. All the way, Anna was tense and silent, refusing to answer Anatoly's questions. Only when they were already approaching Moscow did she finally speak. "What I am about to tell you will sound crazy, Anatoly, but you have to believe me. Lives depend on it." She told him the story that she had learned partly from Ekaterina's letter, partly from her dreams, and partly from Maria, who apparently knew much more than she let on. According to this story, the Varnin family, later becoming the Sokolovs, there was an ancient line of guardians. They protected a certain artifact, a relic of incredible power, which could not be destroyed, but which also could not be left unattended. This artifact, simply called the heart, was part of something much bigger, something ancient and powerful that slept deep beneath the Ural Mountains. Many thousands of years ago, when the first people came to these lands, they discovered this being and, not understanding its nature, disturbed its sleep. The being awoke and nearly destroyed all living things around it. Only through the intervention of ancient shamans was it possible to subdue it, extract its heart, and plunge it back into sleep. But the heart could not be destroyed. It had to be guarded, preventing it from reuniting with its body. For this purpose, a young female shaman named Yeka was chosen. She took the heart into herself, becoming its living vessel. But the burden was too heavy for one person, for one life. Therefore, the shamans created a ritual that allowed Yeka to transfer her consciousness and the heart into the body of her daughter when she reached a certain age. Thus began the dynasty of guardians, each of whom was simultaneously a mother, a daughter, and a granddaughter of the previous one. The cycle continued for millennia, allowing one consciousness, one soul, to exist throughout the ages, carrying within itself the heart of the ancient being and preventing it from returning to its body. But in the 20th century, something changed. People appeared who learned about the existence of the heart and wanted to use its power for their own purposes. They began hunting for Ekaterina, forcing her to flee and hide. "Ekaterina hid the heart before disappearing," said Anna. "She hid it in a safe place, where these people will not be able to find it, but she always planned to return for it when the time came, and that time has come now." Sokolov listened to this story with growing disbelief. "Mom, this sounds like a horror movie plot. You can't seriously believe this." Anna looked at him sadly. "I'm not asking you to believe, Anatoly. I'm asking you to help me find your daughter before they do. Those who hunt for the heart. They call themselves the guardians of sleep, which is ironic, considering that their goal is to awaken the sleeper. They believe that they can control him, use his power, but they are wrong. No one can control such power. If the sleeper awakens, it will be the end of everything." The plane began to descend, and the conversation was interrupted. When they landed in Moscow, it was already late at night. They immediately took a taxi and headed to the address that Anatoly had for his ex-wife and daughter. The house was in a quiet suburb of Moscow. All the windows were dark. When they arrived, Sokolov rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He called his ex-wife on her cell phone, but the phone was turned off. "Maybe they left," suggested Anna, but the anxiety in her voice suggested that she was thinking of something much worse. Sokolov went around the house and looked into the kitchen window. What he saw made his heart stop. His ex-wife, Elena, lay on the floor in a pool of blood. Next to her lay a man in black, whom Anatoly did not recognize, also dead. He immediately called the police and an ambulance, although it was obvious that help was no longer needed. When the authorities arrived, the house was thoroughly searched, but young Ekaterina was nowhere to be found. The police began an investigation, but Anatoly and Anna knew that they could not wait for official results. They were sure that the guardians of sleep were behind Ekaterina's disappearance, and they had to find her first. The next few days turned into a desperate search. They turned to everyone who might know something, to Ekaterina's friends, her teachers, her neighbors. But no one had seen her in the days before her disappearance. It seemed she had simply vanished. And then Anna remembered the diary. Ekaterina's diary, she said. Maybe there is a key in it. Maybe it will tell us where to look. They returned to Ekaterinburg, and Sokolov took the diary out of the box that he, contrary to his mother's advice, had taken with him. They began to reread it, looking for any clues as to where the relic might be hidden. And they found it. In one of the entries, dated 24 years ago, Ekaterina wrote about a sacred place, the cradle of the sleeper, located deep in the mountains, not far from the pass that would later become known as Dyatlov Pass. She described an ancient temple, hidden from view, accessible only to those who know the way. It must be there, said Anna. The heart and possibly Katya too. Sokolov looked at her with doubt. Mom, I can't believe that we are seriously considering this possibility. This sounds insane. You saw Elena's body. Anna replied, You saw the diary, you read the letter. How much more evidence do you need, Anatoly? Your daughter is in danger, and we may be the only ones who can save her. In the end, Sokolov agreed. They began preparing for an expedition into the mountains. It was risky. Winter was in full swing, and Dyatlov Pass was notorious for its harsh conditions. But they had no choice. Time was running out. They hired a local guide, an elderly man named Vasily, who knew these places well. When they told him where they wanted to go, he initially refused. Dyatlov Pass is cursed, he said, especially in winter. It's no place for tourists. But when Sokolov showed him a photograph of young Ekaterina and explained that she was missing and might be there, Vasily softened. I know these mountains better than anyone else, he said. If your girl is there, we'll find her. They set off the next morning. The weather was clear but cold. The temperature was dropping well below zero. They traveled by snowmobile as far as possible and then continued on skis. Vasily led them with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire life in these mountains. As they approached the pass, the weather began to change. The sky clouded over. The wind picked up. Vasily looked worried. A storm is approaching, he said. We need to find shelter. But Anna insisted on continuing. We're almost there, she said, although it was not clear how she knew. We can't stop now. They continued through the intensifying blizzard. Visibility dropped to almost zero, and even Vasily seemed to have lost his bearings. We have to stop, he shouted through the howling wind. We'll get lost and freeze to death. But just then, Anna saw something through the snow curtain. There, she cried, pointing to a dark opening in the rock that looked like the entrance to a cave. They struggled to reach the cave, battling the wind and snow. The entrance was narrow, barely enough for a person to squeeze through. But inside, the cave widened, forming a spacious hall. To their surprise, it was not dark inside. A faint, pulsating light emanated from the depths of the cave, painting the walls in a reddish hue. And in this light, they saw figures, a group of people standing around something that looked like an altar. Sokolov and his companions instinctively ducked, hiding in the shadows at the entrance. They saw 5 or 6 people in dark clothes, their faces hidden by hoods. And on the altar lay a girl whom Anatoly immediately recognized. His daughter, Ekaterina. She was unconscious or asleep. Her hands and feet were tied. Next to her, on the altar, lay a strange object, emitting the same reddish light that illuminated the cave. It looked like a crystal or a precious stone, but it pulsated like a living heart. One of the people in hoods, apparently the leader, held an ancient tome in his hands and read from it in a language that Sokolov did not understand. With each word, the light from the crystal became brighter, and the cave itself seemed to tremble, as if something was awakening deep beneath them. "We have to stop them," whispered Anna. "They are trying to awaken the sleeper. If they complete the ritual, it will be too late." Vasily, who until that moment had been skeptical of Anna's stories, now looked frightened. "I know this ritual," he whispered. "My grandmother told me about it. It is a summoning of the Ancient One, the one whose name must not be spoken." Sokolov did not know what to think. Part of him still refused to believe in all this mystical madness. But another part, the one who had seen Elena's body, who had read Ekaterina's diary, who was now looking at his daughter lying on the altar, was ready to believe anything. "What do we do?" he asked. "We need to interrupt the ritual and take the heart," said Anna. "That's the only way." They began to develop a plan. Vasily, despite his fear, agreed to help. He was a hunter and had a rifle with him. Sokolov was also armed with a small pistol, which he had taken for protection against wild animals. Anna was unarmed but seemed to know what to do. Their plan was simple. Vasily would create a diversion on one side of the cave, while Sokolov would try to get to the altar from the other side. Anna would wait at the entrance, ready to help them escape with Ekaterina and the heart. They began to execute the plan. Vasily went around the cave and fired into the air, creating an echo that seemed to come from all directions. The cultists panicked for a moment, interrupting the ritual. At that moment, Sokolov rushed to the altar. He managed to reach his daughter before the cultists recovered. He quickly cut the ropes that bound her and tried to lift her, but she was too heavy for him in his current state of panic and adrenaline. And then he noticed that her eyes were open, but the look in them was strange, unafraid, unsurprised, but knowing. She looked at him as if she could see right through him, as if she knew him better than he knew himself. "Anatoly," she said, and her voice sounded different, deeper and older than the voice of a 16-year-old girl. "You're late. The ritual has already begun." He froze, not knowing what to say, and then he heard his mother's voice behind him. "Ekaterina, is that you?" The girl on the altar turned her head and smiled at Anna. "My daughter, you have grown so beautiful." Sokolov realized what was happening, what his mother had been talking about. The cycle was coming to an end. The consciousness of Ekaterina, the very Ekaterina who was his grandmother, who was a mother and a granddaughter at the same time, now resided in the body of his daughter. But before he could do or say anything, one of the cultists pounced on him from behind. He felt a sharp pain in his side and realized that he had been stabbed. He fell to his knees, trying to stop the bleeding. Vasily continued to fire, creating chaos, but the cultists now knew that they were not alone. The leader of the cult grabbed the pulsating crystal and raised it above his head, continuing to read from the ancient tome. Ekaterina rose from the altar and, despite her weakness, moved toward the leader of the cult. "Give me back my heart," she said in a voice that seemed to come not from her but from everywhere at once. The leader of the cult stepped back but did not release the crystal. "You are no longer the guardian," he said. "Your time has passed. Now we will awaken the sleeper and obtain his power." Ekaterina continued to approach. "You don't understand what you're doing. You won't be able to control him. No one can." But the leader of the cult did not listen. He cast one last look at Ekaterina and rushed to flee deeper into the cave, carrying the crystal with him. The remaining cultists followed him. Sokolov, bleeding, watched as his daughter, or the being that was now in her body, turned to him. "You're hurt," she said, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "Anna, help him." Anna rushed to her son and began to bandage his wound. Vasily approached them, holding his rifle ready. "What now?" he asked. "Now we have to stop them," said Ekaterina. "They are going to wake him up. If that happens, all will be lost." She headed in the same direction that the cultists had fled. Anna helped Sokolov to his feet, and they followed her. The wound was painful but not fatal, and the adrenaline helped him to move. The cave went deep into the mountain, forming a complex system of tunnels and halls. But Ekaterina seemed to know exactly where to go. She led them confidently, as if she had been here many times before. Finally, they reached a huge hall, so large that their flashlights could not illuminate it completely. In the center of the hall was a pit, from which emanated the same reddish light as from the crystal. The cultists stood around the pit, and their leader held the crystal over it, continuing to read from the tome. Sokolov felt the ground shaking beneath his feet. Something was moving deep below, something huge and ancient. He realized that everything his mother had said was true. The sleeper was real and he was waking up. Ekaterina stepped forward. "Stop!" she cried, and her voice echoed through the hall. "You don't know what you are awakening." The leader of the cult turned around. His eyes burned with fanatical fire. "We know exactly what we are doing. We are freeing the god who has been imprisoned here for millennia. A god who will give us power that we have never dreamed of." "He is not a god," replied Ekaterina. "He is something much more ancient and terrible. He was here before the first people appeared, before these mountains rose from the earth. And he will give you nothing but death." But the leader of the cult only laughed and threw the crystal into the pit. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the light from the pit became brighter. The red light changed to dazzling white. The earth shook with such force that several cultists fell to their knees. A pillar of light rose from the pit, reaching the ceiling of the cave and seeming to pass through it. Sokolov felt a strange feeling of horror engulf him, so primitive and deep that it seemed to come not from his mind but from the depths of his being, from his DNA, from the memory of the species passed down from generation to generation. It was fear of something that man should not have seen, of something that should not exist in the world of men. And then he heard it, a sound that could not be called a roar or a scream, or any other sound that a living creature could make. It was something alien, inhuman, not even animal. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. A sound that felt more like a vibration in the bones than something that could be heard with the ears. Ekaterina turned to them. Her eyes glowed with the same white light that came from the pit. "Run!" she cried. "Run, while there is still time." But Anna shook her head. "No, mother, I won't leave you, not this time." Ekaterina smiled, and in that smile was a 1,000-year-old sadness. "My brave daughter, but this is my burden, not yours. I must finish what I started so long ago." She turned to the pit, from which something huge and indefinite was now rising, something that constantly changed shape, as if it could not decide what it should be in this world. Ekaterina raised her hands, and threads of the same white light that emanated from the pit burst from her fingers. "What is she doing?" whispered Sokolov. "She is using the power of the heart," replied Anna. "She is trying to drive him back, but without the heart itself, I don't know if she can." The cultists panicked and rushed to the exit. Their bravado disappeared at the sight of what they had awakened. Only their leader remained, watching what was happening with an expression of horror and awe on his face. Ekaterina began to sing in a language that Sokolov did not understand but that sounded older than any language he knew. With each word, the threads of light emanating from her hands became brighter and thicker, entangling the form rising from the pit. The being struggled, making the same unearthly sounds as before. It struck at the threads of light, trying to tear them. But Ekaterina did not give up. She continued to sing. Her voice became stronger, resonating with the cave itself. And then Sokolov saw the leader of the cult, taking advantage of the moment, sneaking up on Ekaterina from behind with a knife in his hand. Without thinking, Sokolov grabbed his pistol and fired. The bullet hit the cultist in the shoulder, causing him to drop the knife and fall to the ground. But the shot distracted Ekaterina, and for a moment her concentration was broken. The threads of light weakened, and the being took advantage of this to break free. It rose completely from the pit, filling the cave with its presence. Now Sokolov could see it more clearly. It was huge, larger than any known animal, but its form was indefinite, constantly changing, as if made of smoke or shadow. Only its eyes were constant, huge, glowing with white light, full of ancient hatred and hunger. "We need the heart," cried Ekaterina. "Find the heart." Sokolov looked around and saw the crystal lying on the edge of the pit, where it had been thrown during the struggle. He rushed to it, overcoming the pain from his wound. When his fingers touched the crystal, he felt a strange sensation, as if he had touched living flesh, pulsating to the beat of a heart. The crystal was warm and seemed to vibrate with the energy contained within it. Sokolov picked up the crystal and turned to Ekaterina. "I have it," he cried. Ekaterina nodded, without interrupting her song. She gestured for him to throw the crystal to her. Sokolov wound up, preparing to throw. But at that moment, the wounded leader of the cult grabbed his leg, causing him to lose his balance. The crystal slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor of the cave. Anna rushed to the crystal, but the being noticed her. One of its tentacles, consisting of darkness and light, simultaneously struck her, throwing her aside. "Mom!" cried Sokolov, breaking free from the cultist's grip and rushing to his mother. She was unconscious but alive. Vasily, who had remained in the shadows all this time, now stepped forward. He threw down his rifle, which would have been useless against such a being, and ran to the crystal. He managed to grab it and throw it to Ekaterina before the being's tentacle caught up with him. Ekaterina caught the crystal, and at the moment it touched her hands, the entire cave lit up with a blinding light. When Sokolov could see again, he saw that Ekaterina was standing in the center of a vortex of energy. The crystal hovered before her, pulsating to the beat of her words. Now her song had changed, becoming more powerful, more purposeful. The threads of light emanating from her hands and the crystal entangled the being, compressing it, forcing it to shrink and retreat back into the pit. The being fought with incredible fury. Its tentacles struck the walls of the cave, causing rockfalls. One of the boulders nearly crushed Sokolov and his mother, but he managed to drag her to safety. The battle between Ekaterina and the being continued for what seemed like an eternity. Sokolov saw his daughter's powers, or the woman who now occupied his daughter's body, waning. Her song was getting weaker, the threads of light thinner, but she did not give up. And then Sokolov realized what she was going to do. She was not just trying to drive the being back into its prison. She was going to follow it, to become its eternal jailer. "No!" he cried, rushing toward her. "There has to be another way." Ekaterina turned to him, and for a moment he saw in her eyes his daughter, a frightened 16-year-old girl who did not understand what was happening. But then that expression was replaced by another, the determination of a woman who had lived thousands of years and knew what she had to do. "Goodbye, son of my daughter," she said. "Take care of her when I'm gone." And before Sokolov could do or say anything, she jumped into the pit, taking the being and the crystal with her. The last thing he saw was her silhouette, surrounded by light, before the pit closed, leaving behind only a smooth stone floor. The cave began to shake and collapse. Stones fell from all sides. Sokolov picked up his mother in his arms and rushed to the exit. Vasily followed him, supporting him when he stumbled. They barely made it outside before the entrance to the cave collapsed, burying everything that was inside. Outside, the blizzard had subsided, and the sky had cleared, revealing the stars. Sokolov laid his mother on the snow and fell next to her, exhausted and having lost a lot of blood. The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was a feeling of peace, a strange feeling that everything had ended correctly, as it should have ended. Sokolov woke up in a hospital in Ekaterinburg 3 days later. Anna was sitting next to his bed, reading a book. She looked tired but calm. "Mom," he croaked. Anna looked up and smiled. "You're finally awake," she said, pouring him some water. Sokolov drank the water and tried to sit up. "What happened? How did we get here?" "Vasily called the rescuers," replied Anna. "He told them that we had been caught in an avalanche. They flew in by helicopter and brought us here." "And Katya?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. Anna shook her head. "Her body was not found. Officially, she is considered missing." Sokolov closed his eyes, feeling tears streaming down his cheeks. "She sacrificed herself to save us, to save everyone." "Yes," Anna replied quietly. as every Ekaterina has done for thousands of years. It is the burden of our family. Sokolov opened his eyes. Do you think she will return, like before? Anna was silent for a long time before answering. I don't know. Maybe the cycle has finally broken. Maybe she found a way to seal the sleeper once and for all. Or maybe she's just waiting for the time to come to return again. They sat in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Outside, snow began to fall, gently settling on the windowsill. 3 months later, Sokolov returned to his work at the university. The wound had healed, leaving only a scar as a reminder of what had happened. He told no one about the events in the cave. Who would have believed him? Officially, his daughter was still considered missing, and he regularly checked to see if there was any news of her, although he knew that there would not be. One evening, when he was working late, reviewing old archives for a new book, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Hello, he answered. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then a woman's voice that made his heart stop. Dad? Katia? He whispered, not believing his ears. Yes, Dad, it's me, the voice replied. I don't remember what happened. I woke up in a hospital in Novosibirsk without any documents and with amnesia. They were only just able to establish my identity. Sokolov felt overwhelmed with joy and relief. I'm coming to get you right now, he said. Okay, Dad. I'll be waiting. Sokolov hung up the phone and paused for a moment to think. Could it be? Could it be that Ekaterina, the ancient being that had inhabited his daughter's body, had left, leaving his real daughter? Or was this just another twist in the endless cycle? He did not know, and at the moment it did not matter. His daughter was alive, and he was going to bring her home. And they would worry about what awaited them in the future when the time came. Sokolov gathered his things and left the office, closing the door behind him. He did not notice that an old photograph on his desk, a photograph of Ekaterina Voronina taken in 1933, momentarily flashed with a strange white light before returning to being an ordinary black and white photograph. Outside, it was beginning to snow, softly and quietly, like a whisper. The ancient mountains kept their secrets, and the Sokolov family or the Varnin family, if one went back far enough into the past, was one of them. And although Anatoly Sokolov did not yet know it, the cycle was not over. Never ends. Ekaterina always returns, because some obligations do not end with death. Some debts require eternity to be paid. And deep beneath Dyatlov Pass, in the darkness that human eyes have not seen, something ancient and terrible continued to sleep, guarded by a woman who was a mother and a granddaughter at the same time. The most twisted dynasty in Russia, as those few who knew their secret called them. A dynasty cursed and blessed at the same time. A dynasty that will continue to exist as long as the mountains exist, as long as the world exists. Because some secrets are too important to disappear, some stories are too important to end. And who knows, maybe one day, when you are traveling in the Urals, you will meet a young woman with deep, dark eyes that seem too old for her face. And if you ask her name, she will smile and say, Ekaterina, and you will never know how old she really is, how many lives she has lived, how many sacrifices she has made, because some secrets are better left buried. As Anatoly's Aunt Maria used to say, some doors are better left unopened. But if you still decide to dig deeper, if you decide to follow her, then remember. The mountains remember everyone who dares to disturb their peace, and what sleeps beneath them remembers even better. And it is always hungry, always waiting, always hoping that the chain that holds it will one day break, that one day it will be free. But until that happens, we can sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere there in the mountains, a woman with ancient eyes and an eternally young body continues her endless vigil, protecting the world from what lies beyond reality. A woman who is a mother and a granddaughter at the same time. A woman who always returns.